Okay, today we're going to talk about vampires, Dracula, and a whole bit, and that's why I've got Catherine with me. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, good to be here.
I heard you got a lot of information for us.
I do. I've definitely read some academic stuff about vampires in the past. I've consumed a lot of vampire content, as you can imagine. Um, Growing up, big horror fan, so this is very much in my wheelhouse.
Well, why don't you just take off and let's get going?
Okay, so Dracula is about. Wait, I thought we were talking about Nosferatu. This isn't about Dracula, right? Or is it? So, let's start from the beginning. We'll start with Bram Stoker, who wrote his novel Dracula in 1897. It's an epistolary novel. Do you know that word?
I do not know that word.
I love this word. It's such a pedantic thing to say, but I love it because it just means that it's told in letters and diary entries and things like that. It's somewhat similar to Frankenstein too. It was kind of a thing that people were doing there for a while, but basically what is told in the story is just as important as what's not told in the story. It's the shadow
Okay.
of the vampire.
Which will come back in 2000.
Yes, yes. So we have our narrator, Jonathan. Jonathan is a London lawyer. He has a fiance. Fiance's name is Mina. And Jonathan is hired to go to Transylvania and help this guy basically purchase land in London and like get his estate in order and bring him back to London, right? Of course, this is mostly just a ploy for Dracula to get to London, right? This is all familiar so far.
Yes, sir.
I've read most of this novel. I have not ever finished it, but I read most of it. So, Jonathan is like kind of this silly, oblivious dude. He shows up in the Carpathian Mountains and he's talking to these like Slavic people and doesn't really speak their language, and they're like trying to warn him. They're giving him all these talismans. They're doing all these things to try to prevent him from dying, from being killed by Dracula, because they know what he really is. They know what he does. But he's just like, oh, these nice people, they're so friendly. They're giving me all these things. They love me. Blah, blah, blah. So he works the Dracula. He gets their affairs in order, gets them all back to London. Meanwhile, his fiancée, Mina, starts hanging out with this girl, Lucy, and Lucy starts to get sick. And they bring in this doctor. You might have heard of him. His last name is Van Helsing.
Is he really old and had like super thick glasses?
Yeah,
that's exactly the guy I'd pick to hunt Dracula with me.
Exactly. He's an academic, though. He's a smart guy, right? So he comes in, he figures out the whole situation, yada, yada, yada. They formulate a plan. They kill Dracula. They cut his head off and stake him at the same time. That's the end. So the book was super popular, very well liked. Obviously, it's still a big part of our zeitgeist, right? This novel really codified the way we think of vampires. They codified the rules of vampires, like how they act, what they do, their routines, all that kind of stuff. It all is traced back to this novel, right?
Okay. And I did want to talk to you about that later, about the powers that this Orlok had compared to the powers that Dracula had.
Okay, you may know a little bit more about that than me, so I'll let you do that. Now, obviously, with a novel like this, there's a lot of thematic stuff that we could get into. You could talk about, the anti-Semitism. You could talk about race and racism. You could talk about sickness, the fear of being sick, right? This girl Lucy, she gets sick. She gets like a wasting disease. What is that similar to?
Yeah. Well, that's what is that similar to?
Tuberculosis.
Oh, tuberculosis. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say that they use that pretty well in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Killer because his mother had the wasting disease. She died of the wasting disease.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't know this. I just looked this up, but apparently during the 1800s, so like basically kind of that whole century, that was like one of the big peaks of tuberculosis, specifically in Europe. Apparently, a quarter of the adult population was killed by tuberculosis in Europe
Wow.
during the 19th century.
Doesn't
So,
get the press that the Black Plague gets.
no, the Black Plague was pretty awful, but there's something romantic in the capital R romantic sense about tuberculosis because it's not ewy and pussy and disgusting the way that the bubonic plague was. What happens when you have tuberculosis? You get pale, you get thin, you get tired, your hollow sunken eyes, you're coughing up a little bit of blood, you have red lips, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's very vampire-y.
Very vampire-y,
Very
right?
willowy.
Exactly.
And vampire people.
Mm-hmm. So you can see that connection.
Unless you go with Sookie Stackhouse, and then you're the kind of vampire you stay the way you were bitten. So like if you're fat and lazy, you stay fat and lazy as a vampire.
Yeah, see, but they are playing on those rules that we learned from Dracula, right? Everything just builds on this like set of rules because really, if you go back and look at vampires, like folkloric vampires, you're looking at like 1500s, before we really understood the decaying and decomposition process of the human body. Vampires had a lot more in common with zombies.
Zombies,
Yes. So like they were not necessarily these beautiful night walker type people. They were very like not much going on up here and like just mindlessly eating, consuming.
They did that with the older vampires in Interview with the Vampire in the Anne Rice book.
Yes, because Anne Rice did her research. So anyway, a lot of these things, we could talk a lot about these themes, but I think we could move on into Nosferatu. So we didn't see a Dracula adaptation to film until 1931. So how does this relate to Nosferatu? Well, Nosferatu is kind of a crazy situation in general, right? You want to start with the production company that created Nosferatu. The production company was called Prana, and Prana is like this Hindu concept, I believe. I don't know too much about it, but one of the two guys who started the company in 1921 was this man named Albin Grau, and Albin was a theosopher. Theosopher? He belonged to Theosophy, which was a cult religion that was started by Madame Helena Blavatsky. And I don't know if you know much about any of that.
I do not.
So think in the same vein as like Aleister Crowley, Edgar Cayce, like those kinds of people. People who were like trying to kind of break from Western religion and started looking more at like Eastern things, and they were looking more into like mystical stuff, spiritualism. This is all kind of coinciding with spiritualism, occultism. It's all kind of, you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So this guy decided that he wanted to open up a production company studio that would make occult films. So their first foray into the occult films was going to be a vampire movie. Now, Did they get the rights to Dracula?
Well, I think they tried, maybe.
Cause money. They didn't.
They didn't try at all.
They didn't. At this point, Bram Stoker had passed away already.
Right.
So the person who was in charge of the rights was his wife, and her name was
Mrs. Bram Stoker?
no, her name was Florence Balcom.
Oh, okay.
So we'll talk a little bit more about her later. But she had no idea about this movie until after it had already premiered.
Okay.
So anyway, instead of paying the money to get the rights to the real Dracula, they basically just hired a guy to make a few changes.
Mhm.
So we already kind of talked about Dracula's plot. You watched this Nosferatu movie more recently than I have.
Today.
So do you want to run us through a little bit about the plot and see what the similarities are?
Well, it's very similar. I mean, Hutter is a lawyer or a realty
Barrister.
agent.
Oh yeah.
And he goes over there and he gets called to Transylvania, Wallachia as they used to call it back in the day, and makes a transition. Dracula bites, or I'm sorry, Count Orlok
Yeah.
bites him a few times and leaves him locked in the castle when he leaves, and but he breaks out, follows, and they have a great chase. Dracula's on the boat. It's not called the Demeter.
Orlok.
Boy. Okay, so they have a big chase. Orlok is on the boat, and Hutter has escaped and is following him, and they're in pursuit. So while that one story's going on, the other story's going on. He is, of course, seen the picture of Hutter's wife, and her name is...
I wrote it down too. Ellen.
Ellen. He's seen Ellen, and he's just crazy for her. And it just happens they sell him the house that's right across the street. The Hutter's boss is the head broker, and he goes crazy and gets in the mental hospital. So that's what I was talking about a while ago. The Orlok's, he's already reaching all the way to England and controlling Ellen.
It's not England. It's actually Germany. It's
yes, it is.
Weisburg, Germany.
Weisburg. So good catch. So it's actually, yeah. So he's already reaching ahead and projecting much more telepathic control than Dracula did in the movie, So anyway, he goes there, and Ellen is reading the book, about that Hutter brings back about dealing with vampires, and she figures out a way to kill him by making him miss the crowing of the cock in the morning. That's why she sacrifices herself for the good.
Because he's so distracted by her beauty or whatever, and that she's freely giving her blood.
Yeah, and really, she looked kind of creepy through the whole movie with big eyes and always walking
it's
around in her
silent era movie.
Yeah, but I mean, it
Makeup.
was worse. It was worse than the she looked like something scared her right away, and she walked around in her. A lot of people in this movie walked around in night clothes. She was wearing a nightgown. The Helsing character was wearing a robe a lot of the time. There was a lot of pajama scenes in this movie, which I thought was interesting. But the ship, Orlok kills off the crew one by one, and of course the captain lashes himself to the wheel at the end, but the rats were still alive. And the one thing I thought on the ship, so he didn't feed on the small animals first, like you would think, trying to keep himself. And then everywhere the ports they touch, they think the plague is coming out of the Black Sea and all that, but they call it a stigmata, the two marks on the neck. A stigma, yes, exactly. And I thought, well, that's real interesting, because there's an inversion there between Orlok and Dracula.
Right, especially because Orlok has kind of been considered an anti-Semitic caricature. You didn't know that?
Okay. No, I did not know that. What's that based on? Because he's making him a bad guy.
Well, yeah,
if you assume that the vampire is always a bad guy.
There's all the poisoning of the well thing with Jews in history, right? Oh, this plague was caused by Jews. This thing was caused by Jews, right? So
Okay.
like if he's going from port to port and people are dying from this
Okay.
like
Oh no, I did not.
rats,
Yeah,
you know?
I did not know any of that. So
Oh yeah.
that's very interesting.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily coincidence that Orlok looks kind of like a rat. He has a very pointy rat-like appearance.
Which
With his
is the
little
rats.
pointy fingers.
Yeah. And the rats were responsible for the Black Plague because of the fleas on the rats, because they killed all the cats and dogs and made the rats population boom.
And
that's very
fun
interesting.
fact, or maybe not so fun fact, but Jews got blamed for the Black Plague too.
Oh, I didn't know that. I really like, though, an Orlok, the way he looks, even if you say he looks like a rat. It's different, and I like the way they incorporated that style of vampire into, like, what we do in the shadows and some more modern interpretations.
Oh, yeah. He's
oh,
like
yeah,
the
he's one of
old
those,
style vampire.
Yeah, he's a Nosferatu guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's very similar to the movie. You know, I mean, it's very similar to Dracula. They didn't change very much.
No, there's only like a few more. I will say that Nosferatu definitely does feel more occult in a lot of ways, because like there's all that kind of like almost telepathic stuff. She's like dreaming about Nosferatu and like all this sort of stuff. But like it's really very similar. I will say that one of the earliest exposures that I had to Nosferatu was from a SpongeBob SquarePants episode that aired in 2002. There's just a really random bit, because it's like kind of a spooky episode, right? And then just like at the end, there's just this little like joke where like, oh no, the lights were flickering and that was so scary. Oh no, actually it turns out it was just Nosferatu over there flipping the light switch. Like, why? I have no idea. And I mean, it's so interesting that this movie has like such a place in the cultural zeitgeist, being such a blatant ripoff. I mean, they both have their own places, but it's very interesting.
You brought that back now. So, if I'm understanding correctly, when the widow found out, she took legal action against this movie, right?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit more about that. Yeah. Yes. So her name, like I said, was Florence Balcom. Both her and Bram Stoker were Irish. I didn't know that until today. I always thought he was English. And fun fact, Florence dated Oscar Wilde before she married Bram Stoker.
Well, that puts her in a pretty small club.
Yeah, I would say so. But, you know, also fun fact, Bram Stoker had some homosexuality allegations too. So maybe that was just Florence's type.
Maybe.
I don't know. So anyway, the premiere of Nosferatu was actually like a big to-do in Berlin. Apparently, it was like premiered at a really nice theater. It was a whole big thing with an orchestra, as silent films were intended, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she didn't find out until she basically received an anonymous letter. I learned a lot of this from the Women's Museum of Ireland. So that's where I got a lot of that information, all this stuff about her and like dating Oscar Wilde. So I thought that was really cool. But anyway, I guess because it was sort of location locked up until that point, it was really just kind of a German film premiering in Germany, and it wasn't necessarily like a big international thing until she found out about it. And then she did not have that many means, honestly, at that point. So she joined this thing called the Society of Authors. I guess it's like a union type situation, right? Because when her husband died, she was kind of the executor of his literary works and stuff like that.
Sure.
So she joined them, and they helped her through a 3-year legal battle. So what she won out of that 3-year legal battle? £5,000.
That's a pretty good bit of money, though.
So I did do some calculations. According to the Bank of England, that in today's money would be about £260,000. which in US dollars is 330,000 basically US dollars. So you could buy a house with that.
Yeah, I mean, or they're paying actors, $20 a week or something back then, 20.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, so that wasn't the only stipulation. That's not the only thing she won. Do you know what the other thing she won was?
Yes, I do, but go ahead.
Oh, wow. Okay. They had to destroy every copy of the movie.
Right.
No.
And they didn't do it.
Did they do that? They clearly did not, because here we are in 2024, 102 years later, able to see pretty much the entire movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I just watched a beautifully restored copy. Again, it had a new soundtrack with it, a modern, an updated soundtrack. It wasn't a modern soundtrack.
Right.
And I was thinking about that. Like, this is a really good copy considering that it was all supposed to be destroyed.
Yeah. Well, so she also apparently had some legal battles with Universal Studios, because apparently she had heard that they were trying to acquire the rights to it too afterwards. So it was like even more legal stuff for her with that.
Yeah, when they actually got the rights to Dracula and made that movie, and then when they were going to make Dracula's daughter, which wasn't Dracula's daughter at the time, the wife was wanting, creative control and more money and everything. And so they did the same thing. They had somebody write a new story about Dracula's daughter.
Basically fan fiction at that point.
Yeah. Getting away with it. All right.
It really, that is kind of the end of the story part. But I do really think that this whole situation does bring up a really interesting discussion about copyright, public art, public consumption. What is the public owed? Because clearly, for some reason, this movie is pervasive. People wanted it. They didn't want it to go away. They wanted to restore it. They wanted to preserve it. They wanted it to be available in the future, and here it is, surely.
Yeah.
And do I think that Florence Malcolm was wrong for, wanting to be compensated for it? Absolutely not. But I don't know that necessarily wanting it to be destroyed either was the right answer.
On a music infringement case, if you infringe on somebody's music copyright, you lose 100% of the royalty.
But the song still exists.
Yeah, the song still exists, but the one way to keep them from making any more royalties is to destroy it. If you look at it as a artistic creation, that's one way to stop it forever, but it didn't work out.
No, do we still hear Ice Ice Baby on the radio?
But that goes ding da ling ding, and the other one goes ding da ling ding.
Yeah. Of course.
I hope I don't get infringed, or I don't hope I get a copyright strike for.
I'm sure you're fine. Ding. You didn't do it yet. No, but I did. It is a really interesting discussion about art and how we consume it. And I think that the word consume or consumption when it comes to art is so interesting. Why do we say consume? Why do we ingest it, we take it, we chew it up, we spit it out? It is purely consumption of art is a purely avaricistic act. It is completely selfish.
Okay, because when art's supposed to invoke emotion.
Sure.
So you have to consume it to get that invocation, get invoked, get that emotion. But you just brought up something, and I know this is an interesting topic to you. I was listening to a podcast on ephemera the other day, and it was about the UFO history. Oh. And the couple that were the first ones to have the time blank and be picked up.
Betty and Barney Hill?
Yeah. I couldn't remember that. They invented the grays, the shape of the grays, the probing, the whole bit. But now it
yes.
belongs to everybody. Everybody can make Greys now. When did they lose the?
Their story, again, it is like the blueprint. It is the cultural. That is the cultural zeitgeist. That thing happened, and everything since has been some derivation of their situation. Were people maybe talking about aliens before that? Yes, but that is what has stuck in the cultural.
So
everybody's collective conscious.
So how much when you talk about people making deals with the devils at the crossroads? How much of that do you own? How much of it belongs to somebody else? How much of it is cultural tradition?
Yeah.
So real interesting concept.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you saw the Demeter, the last voyage of the Demeter.
I had wanted to. I don't really watch a lot of new movies. I don't really get to the movie theater much.
That's odd. You don't watch a lot of new movies. Where does that come from?
What do you mean?
Well, do you know anybody else that doesn't watch a lot of new movies and just likes to bank on the old stuff?
Yeah, I think I do.
This Voyage of the Demeter just took a part of the Dracula story and it just confined it to the ship. Now, Dracula started feeding on the smaller things, the rats and then the goats and the dog, and building his power up. He was weak because I guess because he left his homeland, and then he was on there with the dumbest dumbest people in the world.
The most horror movie caricature people ever.
By the end of the movie, I was rooting for them to be killed. Get him.
That's the beauty, the joy of a horror film. You understood. You got it.
Yeah. So anyway, it wasn't a very good movie, but I like the concept of how they pulled out a part of it and could have made a great story.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe if Dracula's killed 20 people of your boat and everyone's living things and you're just down to one or two, how about you burn the boat and let it sink, You're
in the middle of the ocean. Where are you going to go?
You're going to be Dracula food in another night or two.
Unless you're either Dracula food or you're shark food.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Which one's better?
Well, I don't know about being Dracula food because you might end up being a Dracula.
Yeah, but at least you wouldn't be dead.
Well, that's another thing in the Nosferatu when he drained Ellen, and it was very good how Willem Dafoe did it, where he just fell asleep, and he would wake up when he was feeding. But she woke up and then died right after it. So did he drain her and kill her, or did she die because he died and was free from the lineage curse?
Ooh, very good question.
Yeah,
I don't actually know.
It doesn't really answer it.
Because, if you're being drained so much to death, you would assume that you wouldn't be awake in the last little bit of it. You would just start passing out and pretty much be...
Because this guy was not... Count Orlok was not about making vampires. That was not his thing.
Was to death.
Eat.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that Max Schreck, who played Count Orloff. Now, persistent rumor that he was really a vampire. The guy went to the place, filmed a real vampire in Carpathians or mountains or whatever, and then killed him at the end. Now, of course, Max Schreck was in tons of other German movies, which would have been kind of hard to do. The costuming.
He has a Wikipedia page, so I think it was more than just one movie.
So the makeups, special effects were just phenomenal for the time. I mean, he didn't look like a guy in a plastic mask.
No.
Running around. He looked really creepy.
He looked like a real Dracula.
He looked like a real Dracula, so much you could be convinced. And of course, they did that in Shadow of the Vampire 2000. I think we talked about that before.
Yes.
It's on the blog, and you can see it or listen to it. But how do you feel about that little rumor and making of the Shadow and all that?
It is a very fun apocryphal story. Like, of course, there's no veracity to it, but it is a fun thing to think about.
Yeah. And those two guys, Willem Dafoe and
Malkovich.
John Malkovich. Yeah, I was going losing John Malkovich. John Malkovich, Willem Dafoe and John Malkovich, they're just so great in those two roles, pairing off of each other.
I mean, Willem Dafoe really nails that Orlok character.
And I know you love the bit where he just grabs the bat and eats it because he stays in character the other actors think he stays in character all the time when he snatches a bat out of the air and eats it.
When he's really just a weird freak.
Yeah. So that, Max Schreck, and it was early on, it was silent films, but his physical, the stiffness, the way he turned and was very erect and everything was very deliberate. Fantastic, just a good use of like a dead body, he's not just running around like Fairbanks Jr. Yeah,
I don't know.
Fairbanks. Anyway, he's not running around like that. He's just very stiff, and he really sets the tone for this. But it wasn't really, Dracula was a little stiffer in 32, with the come here, the downward hand, and the upward hand. That was his two moves,
He was very, regal, very aristocratic.
Yeah, but I'm talking about just some physical movements, No great arm swings, it was very come here.
Yeah. Was this movie before or after Dr. Caligari?
I think Caligari was in the teens, right? Look that up real quick.
Yeah. 1920. So Caligari is right.
Just
right
a little
before
bit.
that. Also German.
Right. So Catherine, do you have any final thoughts, or you have more that you want to go over on your sheet?
I think this was the general gist of what I was getting at. It's interesting that both of these things, obviously Dracula is hugely influential. It is still very much a part of the culture. You say Dracula, everybody knows what you're talking about.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's become one of those things where it's like Band-Aid. It's the brand, but it means all of the generic things too. You can say a Dracula and people know what you mean. You know what I mean? But It's so interesting that this German silent film that could have been lost to history has also managed to carve out a space in our cultural zeitgeist. Why has this become so important? And I think, honestly, it's the Streisand effect. Wanting to snuff it out made it that much more,
That's it. I go for the folklore ritual of inversion. Vampires bitten, 3 days they raise and become dead as an inverse to Jesus, who was killed and raised and came back to life 3 days later. So I think it's a very familiar story if you look at the folklore structural elements of it. Do you know that I don't know if this came up, but Stoker had never been to these locations. He wrote all the descriptions from travel books and stuff.
Oh, those were pretty popular.
Yeah.
People really, ever since people started leaving Europe and exploring other places, travel narratives were very, very popular. So that is interesting.
So really, I'm going to put you on the spot right now.
Oh.
Top 3 vampire movies or films ever.
Oh, obviously Lost Boys, number 1. Bar none. Bar none. Honestly, I gotta go OG Dracula. That's number 2. Number 3? Twilight, Don't Hate Me.
What? Is that a joke?
Yeah, no, I couldn't think of a number 3. I have no idea.
Oh, okay. I would probably put Lost Boys is great. That's a strong contender for number 1, Lost Boys. I really like Dracula's Daughter. And then I like the classic Dracula.
Yeah.
But Nosferatu, Interview with the Vampire. I haven't seen the new one, but there is a new one coming out.
Oh, the TV show. There's a TV show. It's a lot
Okay.
longer form.
Yeah.
I read the book.
I did
I read
too.
the first 3 books of that series.
I broke down on the third one when they made it an Egyptian curse.
Yeah, that was the whole series is very odd. I
Yeah,
feel like I've read a lot more vampire stuff than I've watched vampire stuff. I can't
Yeah.
really even think of like too many other vampire movies that I've seen. I like really I can't even think of like any other. I mean, the only other
What
ones
about
I can think
Fright
of are
Night?
even. Oh, yeah, I guess Fright Night. That's true.
Which is a really good one too.
That is a fun one.
Well, Catherine, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the information and what you put into it. And I will talk to you very soon.
Okay. Thanks for having me.